Now after the NFL owners talk, after free agency. And today, to break it down, I've got a very special guest, the Draft Network's Justin Melo. We're going to be talking about who the 49ers are targeting and more right after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on three. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the program. Earlier today, we talked about the 49ers and we talked about kind of what happened at the owners' meetings, things about that quarterback situation. But now it's time to focus on the second part of the program, and that is the draft. And with me, I've got Justin Melo of the Draft Network here joining me. Justin, how are you doing today, man?
Doing well, Rohan. Appreciate you for having me on.
Appreciate you. The pleasure is mine. And before we get started, I do want to let you introduce yourself to those that may not know you as much, and say what you do over there at the Draft Network.
Yeah. I mostly oversee our NFL draft interview series, so interviewing players and prospects in the draft. I've interviewed more than 700 draft picks in the last 7 drafts. That series is really my bread and butter. I've done several number 1 and number 2 overall picks, and we're in the thick of it right now, dropping about 2 or 3 every single day because I'm backed up. But I'm so thankful and grateful to have an opportunity to tell these players' story.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of the NFL draft, not only the player behind it, but also the person behind it. And so appreciate all the work you do there. Getting into today's program, I know the 49ers, they're an interesting team. No first round pick, no second round pick, and only 3 third round picks in the compensatory range. I want to ask you though, who do you envision could be potential targets for the 49ers, not necessarily only in the third round, but overall?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough with those picks, right? Like having 3 in the third round. There's also some potential to maybe move up if they
Right.
want to, right? Or if they can. They've got so many day 3 picks, right? Well, after the third round, that I would imagine John Lynch, Adam Peters, they do try to move up at some point. I look at that right tackle position. Obviously, there's a hole there with Mike McGlinchey being gone. Some O-line depth with Daniel Brunskill as well, having followed, Rand Carthon to the Tennessee Titans. And I look at cornerback as well. I think corner can use some better depth. I think interior O-line could use some better depth. I think they're fairly well protected at the edge position, but having lost a couple of guys, right, in Charles Omenihu and Samson Ebukam. So I look at those positions, corner and right tackle especially, stick out to me. Then I start looking. I look at the trenches. That's the way they've built this team, right? I think from the inside out. So I look at the D line, I look at the interior of the O line, and I think there's some room for improvement there.
I think that those two are, I mean, obviously very vital, but also important in what the 49ers are doing. You talk about right tackle, Colton McKivitz, they re-signed him. He seems right now to be the guy, but the 49ers openly said it will be a competition, and the contract they provided him, it's not necessarily starter level money. It's not like you're indicating he's going to be the only guy there. They want to have competition there. Makes sense, especially when you allude to a potential trade up for one of the top guys, in that top 6, 7, 8 in this draft. But also, corner, the 49ers, they have 4 guys who I think are solidified. You've got Samuel Womack from last year. You've got the guy who they just signed in Isaiah Oliver, Travarius Ward. And then you've also got Diamado Lenore, the latter 2 of who are likely to start. They normally roll with at least 5. Last year was 5 and 5 safeties, but they could also roll with 6 and 4. Ambry Thomas, I don't think his spot's solidified after 2 uninspiring off seasons. So corner definitely could be a place, especially with the draft where, there are a lot of these athletes and you take a shot at an athlete. That's kind of what the 49ers like to do. Take shots on some of the athletes, see who pans out.
Yeah, look, if they want to take a shot on an athlete, one guy that sort of strikes me as their type is Riley Moss from Iowa. This is a guy with an incredible track background. He's fast. He's got game-changing speed. I'll tell a fun little story. As I was preparing for the Senior Bowl, I was on a call with Jim Nagy, director of the Senior Bowl, and several others, in the media landscape. And when Riley Moss's name came up, one of the bigwigs of the industry, and I'll protect his name. He unmuted himself on the call and he said, "Look, this Riley Moss kid's not getting enough respect. You want to talk about someone that can run? Riley Moss can run. Don't make the mistake of sort of typecasting him. And, you don't see a lot of white cornerbacks in the NFL, but he's not one of those, hard hat, lunch pail kind of guys. He's an athlete. He can run.
Right.
So he sort of strikes me as someone that would be their type there in San Francisco.
And I love the comparison because, I got to first-handedly watch Riley Moss. I'm out here in Wisconsin, so I got to cover the Badgers. And I remember November 15th, the day we played him, the number one player I pointed out on the opposing team, Riley Moss. That's a guy who I need to watch some more film on because, he was intriguing. And the athleticism is certainly there. The question, I guess, with him in regard to our fit with the 49ers would be physicality. Can be physical enough to play corner on the outside in this specific system that requires really good tackling out of their cornerbacks. But, he's a white DB. We got a white DB as our GM. There's that connection there. But, Moss himself like it because an intriguing player, intriguing athleticism, and it feels like he'll be around that round as well.
Yeah, I definitely think he's sort of a third to fourth round pick where really San Francisco is going to have to make their money in this draft. On the topic of right tackle, you talked about adding some competition there, and we alluded to a potential trade up.
Right.
I look at a guy, one that really strikes me is Matthew Bergeron from the University of Syracuse. I think he probably gets picked in that 50 to 65 range. So it might be a little high for them to come up, but with all those third rounders, I think anything is possible. Maybe they include a 2024 day 2 pick, help sweeten the pot, get up there to that 60-ish range. He's a terrific athlete, that Matthew Bergeron is. So I could really see him being their type. You talk about that zone-based running scheme that Kyle Shanahan is running and has sort of grandfathered around the league, right? You look at other teams that are running that scheme now, like the Jets and the Titans, and of course the Packers and the Rams and all those. That he's a great fit for that scheme, Matthew Bergeron is. And I think he's a natural right tackle. I know there's been some talk of kicking him inside to guard. The arm length it's long enough to play tackle, but it's not, maybe as long as you'd like it to be, but it is long enough. Right tackle, right guard, wherever he ends up. I do think he's potentially plug and play at right tackle if you give him an opportunity to play there.
He's certainly intriguing. I think that he does warrant a round 2 selection if you pick him there, given the scarcity at the position and the drop off, really. And right tackle is a position where I think they'll definitely be looking at. Bergeron's another guy who might fall in that category is Oklahoma's Wanya Morris, a guy who suffered an injury at the combine, but is now expected to participate at his pro day or his own pro day in April. So you've got a couple of guys in that range where if you want to move up, Maryland's Jalen Duncan as well. You got a couple of candidates who might be a good system fit and may not necessarily start day one, but the goal isn't always to get a guy who's starting day one in those rounds. It's can you get the guy for the future, which is where the 49ers are trying to position themselves for, understanding they have a stopgap option currently and they're wanting to move forward.
Yeah, and another guy I'll shout out that strikes me as their type certainly is a BYU offensive tackle, Blake Freeland. I think he's being criminally underrated throughout this process. I think he's a terrific athlete. That's that's obvious if you look at sort of the relative athletic score, what he was able to do with the combine and things of that nature. He's an easy mover, man. He's tailor-made for that scheme. I'll be shocked if it's not one of those zone-based teams that drafts Blake Freeland. And San Francisco's one of few, right? One of 5 or 6 that really run that scheme as heavy as they do. So I like Blake better at left tackle. So there may be a positional switch. If San Fran did want to move him to right tackle, that's something they would have to weigh. But I'm a huge fan of Blake Freeland, and I imagine the San Francisco 49ers are as well. Played his ball there on the West Coast, right, at BYU, so they've got an opportunity to get a relatively front row seat to him. A huge fan of his.
And the one other thing that you talk about when it comes to Blake Freeland, or really any of these guys, Trent Williams, he has pondered retirement here this past offseason, and he is not a guarantee to remain with the 49ers. In fact, they could save $15 million if he retires next year, given his cap hit. And so, you've got a couple of options. Trent Williams, a guy who is openly admitted that he does go through these year-to-year kind of questioning about himself in the offseason. And so you have a guy who could potentially play at right tackle before sliding over to left when Williams does make that decision.
Yeah, that's a great point because if you get Blake Freeland in the third or fourth round, if you like him better on the left, it doesn't have to necessarily always be plug and play, right? That's a guy that I think you'd love to stash. Look, good general managers, and John Lynch is a really good general manager. You know what they do? They address needs before they become needs. They
Mhm.
keep the cupboard stocked and ready to go. So when something like that happens, there's a succession plan already in place. And John Lynch, Adam Peters, they are those kind of decision makers. They've done a terrific job with that, in my opinion, over the years. And drafting a guy like Freeland, especially if he's there, that they got 3 picks in the third round, all within, I believe, a few overhauls of each other. That's a guy that I would really like for them.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do agree there. You talked about the trade up, some of these positions of need. Do you think that there's any position that the 49ers might scratch off on their board, understanding where they are? BPA is obviously very important. Do you think that that's that they should prioritize BPA, understanding where they are roster wise?
I think they're in a pretty good position to go BPA if that's what they decide. Like I talked about, right tackle and corner being two of the, bigger needs on the roster. It's a very good roster, right? So there are not a lot of needs on it. So when we look at tackle and corner, you also did a great job talking about how there's already some plans in place, right? A right tackle that they added that could, potentially start for them. They're about 4 deep at corner. If those are your needs, you're in a good place, right? From a roster perspective, and they are in a good place. So I do think they're in a pretty good position to go best player available. I think as the draft goes on, as I said, I think they'd like to probably add another edge rusher at some point. Again, they're in a pretty good spot there, but having lost some depth pieces, I think they could add another 1 or 2. But there's a theme here, and this is good for the San Francisco 49ers. You look at the corner position, you look at the edge position, excuse me. I think they're the position in 2023 NFL. I really do.
Right.
I got 30 draftable grades at corner, and I got
Damn.
another like 30 draftable grades at edge. And I think it's a pretty good draft from an offensive tackle perspective as well. So I think the 49ers are in a really good place here.
You talked about the draftable positions, 30 at edge, 30 at corner. I mean, there's a lot of different solid players, maybe not at the top of the draft, but in that middle tier of the draft. Do you think it's going to be similar to last year where a lot of teams try and get that movement between maybe not 25 and 120 this time, but maybe a little later, maybe around that pick 40, somewhere where right in the middle of that second round to that third, fourth round range? Do you think that that's where really the bread and butter of the class is? What's your anticipation?
Well, I think it starts even earlier than that. In all honesty, as soon as I get to around 20th overall, I sort of feel like there's not a very large gap between the 20th
Mhm.
best player on my board and the 50th best player on my board. And certainly, as you continue to go down, that remains the case all throughout. There's so many guys that have emerged and that continue to emerge. Even if you get to that, 80 to 120 range, I don't think there's a ton of separation among that group right now. So it's a funny class because, initially I didn't love what I had at the top. When I would look at those top 10, top 15 picks, I thought some of them in previous years, I feel like I would have had this guy. I got him at 12. I feel like last year I would have had him at 22 or 23. Right. But as you continue to go down the board, that's when the depth really starts to pop again, especially in that 80 to 120 range. I think a lot of good football players, and I'll throw out another name. If the 49ers want to add some depth, the third round or later at the interior, a guy that I think they're really going to like. And again, he plays his ball on the West Coast. They had a front row seat. Underrated players, UCLA guard John Gaines. If you haven't heard enough about John Gaines, he put on an stunning performance at the
Yeah.
NFL scouting combine. He's unbelievably athletic. You'll see a theme here. I always try to fit prospect to organization. Gaines is going to be a zone-based guy. Right, in the running game, he's unbelievable. What's the foundation of that zone-based scheme, right? Get to your spot before the defender does. It's not always a hat on a hat. It's get to your spot first, right? And John Gaines is an unbelievable athlete, incredible feet. I look at all these zone blocking teams. They always have a type. at guard, and it's an athlete. It's a guy that can be not just a people mover in the run game, but one that quickly gets to the second level. I look at what they've done in Tennessee. They've prioritized athletic moving guards that can spring Derrick Henry. My pro comp for John Gaines is Aaron Brewer, who starts at left guard for the Titans and has also played some center. Gaines has that same versatility. Mostly played guard, but he also played center at UCLA, and I know for a fact teams have talked about him playing center. So that's a
Yeah.
guy that I really like for the 49ers as well, once you get sort of that, third to fifth round range.
Yeah, I mean, that's another name right there. And again, we're trying to find the bread and butter right there in that middle portion of this class where there's a lot of good prospects. I know you have to go. My last question to you regarding the tight end position. I know that's another group where it's a fairly deep class, another class where there's a ton of names. What do you envision happening out of the tight end market? 49ers expected to be interested in it, according to not only the media, but also their own staff. What do you see from the tight end market?
It's a good year to need a tight end, right? I mean, I think you got some high-end guys at the top. Michael Mayer, Luke Musgrave, Dalton Kincaid's exceptional. I'm a big Darnell Washington guy. But once you start getting to the 49ers range, certainly in that third round, closer to 100th overall, they're probably not going to be players, right? For those top guys that I mentioned, of course, it would take too much for them to come up. Maybe they can be a player for a Tucker Kraft. I think that's a guy that's a really good football player that, might not go till 75th overall, for example. And I think San Francisco would have enough ammunition to get up there if they choose to. But I also look at in the range they're drafting, and if they don't want to trade up or they can't trade up, you've got Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan, who's a really good tight end prospect. You've got Payne Durham as well out of Purdue that I thought was really impressive at the Senior Bowl. I thought he was terrific out there. You got the Iowa kid, Sam Laporta. There's no telling where he's going to go as well. So this is a really, really good year to need a tight end. And I imagine the 49ers, they're going to be able to draft a good tight end that could come in and complement George Kittle in two tight end sets. And the great thing is when you have a guy like Kittle, they don't have to draft a specific type at tight end, right? They don't have to go get a guy that can only, catch the ball because Kittle can do that for them. Well, on the flip side, they also don't have to be, zeroing in on it. It's got to be a Y type tight end that could really be an inline blocker only because Kittle can do that too, right? So when you've got a guy like Kittle, it opens up the possibility. So I think if they do go for a type, they'll probably want someone that can play the Y and can block. So on occasion, it could free up Kittle because as good as he is at doing that, you don't want him doing it all the time because he's such a good pass catcher, right? So, and there are some good Y types. And one that I'll give a quick shout out is Braden Willis out of Oklahoma. I don't think he's getting enough attention in this class. He's a really good Y. He can be in line there, hip of the, attached to the hip of the tackle and block. He also had 7 touchdowns this year on only 39 catches. That's something that really impressed me. You want to talk about efficiency? A guy that didn't have a ton of opportunities in the passing game because he's such a good blocker. They asked him to do it. But when he did get those opportunities, he converted them into touchdowns. 7 touchdowns on 39 catches. That's incredible. So it's a good spot. It's a good spot for San Francisco to need a tight end. There are going to be a lot of guys there in round 3 to 5.
I agree. And I mean, I think that that's another position where I think they'll look to address. I mean, they've openly said it, but also we're seeing a shift right in the NFL where there's really a desire for that 21 personnel, the ability to match multiple tight ends on the field at the same time, obviously forcing defenses to more so stack the box, creating more favorable matchups in the passing game, especially when you have 2 tight ends that can do it all. I mean, obviously no one's going to do what Kittle does to the degree that he does in year 1 as a group, but if you can get a guy who can somewhat be able to run routes as well as be a factor in the blocking game, which the 49ers have tried to find in the past with guys like Jordan Reed before drafting Ross Dwelley, Charlie Warner, and then this year signing Tyler Kroft. You're trying to go ahead and get a guy who can be that for the future for the next 4 years, especially because you see the tight end market in free agency skyrocketing. You see backups getting $5 to $7 million annually, and so definitely understand the desire for tight end, especially in this class.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a guy like Josh Oliver, right, who I think just signed a 3-year deal. What did he get? 7 $7.5 million a year annually. I think
Yeah,
some
I think
if my
321, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's exactly what it was, if my memory serves me correctly. So, and that just goes to show you, and I say this all the time, the wide tight end position is so underrated, right? Like, no
Right.
one likes it because it's boring to a degree, right? But it's not the athletic pass catchers that make the wow plays in the passing game, but they got to get, it's the ones that get down and dirty there on the line of scrimmage, and there's not a lot of them. People don't realize how few tight ends are able to line up there on the line and throw a crack block and block a 275-pound defensive lineman. There are so few of those types in the league. San Francisco have really the one unicorn in the NFL at the position, in my opinion, in George Kittle, because, Mark Andrews can't do it. Travis Kelce can't do it, right? Who can do it? George Kittle. But if you go ahead and draft a wide tight end, you free him up to be the weapon that he is in the passing game. Maybe they go get another Iowa guy, pair George Kittle with Sam Laporta, right? Wouldn't that be fun? Or like I said, a guy like Braden Willis who could play that Y for them.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, like you said, a lot of names. And again, couple of different fits. If you want a guy like Sam Laporta versus if you want maybe Will Mallory, Braden Willis, maybe in a Davis Allen. So many different names, so many different players at different stages in their development as well, which is if you want more pro-ready guys, if you want guys who you believe can be a better fit in 2-3 years, especially understanding where the 49ers are with their cap situation, meaning they might have to move on from a guy like George Kittle in the next 2 to 3 years. Definitely a lot of conversations to be had.
Excited to see how it plays out. They're equipped with so many draft picks. John Lynch and Adam Peters are terrific decision makers. Something tells me they're not going to draft at every pick they have, right? There's just too much ammunition there for them in the third round. And then certainly, what do they got? 3 or 4 picks in the 5th round, I think it is as well. So there's a lot of wiggle room. And look, and when you have a roster as good as they are, you don't need to make 3 or 4 5th-round picks. Sometimes what's more valuable than that is packaging a couple of those picks, going up to the 4th round and making one pick, right? Getting that one guy that's going to come in and help you right away, as opposed to getting 3 or 4 guys. So they're in an interesting position, and I can't wait to see how they proceed.
No, 100%, 100%. But Justin, I appreciate you giving some time of your day, shouting out certain players who obviously can fit the 49ers at several positions, not necessarily of need, but players they might look to target in this draft. Any final thoughts before we get on out of here?
No, I mean, I just in general, keep up with the interview series on the draftnetwork.com. I'm dropping 2-3 a day. There's so much incredible content going up, not only from myself, but all of my colleagues that do such a wonderful job every day on the draftnetwork.com. 49ers fans, enjoy the moment. This is a hell of a roster. Adding a guy like Javon Hargrave in free agency, what a move that was. Really signaled their aggressive intentions. Talk about strengthening a strength, right? That D-line was already so good, so tough to deal with. Well, they made it better by going out and getting Hargrave. They got a lot of draft ammunition in the 3rd round and onward. It's unfortunate they don't have a 1st or 2nd rounder, but I really think John Lynch and Adam Peters are going to maximize the selections they have. Going to do a great job adding talent, both in the immediate and guys that they can sort of stash and get ready to contribute in 2024. It's an exciting time to be a 49ers fan, in my opinion. They will contend for a Super Bowl again in 2023. I think there's no doubt about that. So just soak it up and enjoy it. There are about 25 to 30 NFL fan bases that wish they were in the San Francisco 49ers position. So try to enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's always intriguing being a person who covers the 49ers with the amount of information about them. But it's draft season, and that's the next step of the formula. But Justin, I appreciate your time. Thank you guys so much. For those of you guys listening, appreciate always following along. We'll be back with some more content on the 49ers and on the draft very soon.